Welcome to Talk Design Podcast, the space where creativity meets conversation. I'm Adrian Ramsey, your host, and as someone deeply entrenched in the world of design, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the minds that inspire me in the hope that they will spark something special within you too. From a design past crafting women's swimwear to pushing the boundaries of performance sportswear, from mountaineering to international yachting, to implementing systematic innovation solutions that transcend boundaries in aerospace industry. My heart remains rooted in architecture, and exploring the emotional tapestry woven by built spaces is my fascination. My journey in design has been what can only be described as a life of design. I want to thank you for lending me your ears. I'm eager to embark on this next episode together. And for those of you who prefer to watch and listen, you can catch this episode at YouTube. That's youtube.com/@TalkDesignPodcast. My guest on Talk Design today is Daniel Lee. Now, Daniel is a principal at Bowen, Sywinski and Jackson in Philadelphia. That's always a mouthful, that name, you know. It's like it takes a bit to get your head around it.
I still struggle.
Yeah, exactly. Daniel has been in this architectural industry for quite a while and has worked on some incredible projects. And we've just been chatting around some of those projects already, and I can't wait to get this conversation going. So Daniel, welcome to Talk Design.
Pleasure's all mine, Adrian.
Man, I'm so pleased you made the time. This is so far, like I've had a few little looks around your office from the camera, and we've talked about all kinds of things from culture of people, work spaces, and then projects and Meccano and Lego. You know, we've covered a little bit without even recording. So it's always such a beautiful journey to find out more. But let me run right back to early days, because everybody who is in this industry and as an architect could have chosen 100 different things to do with their creative and analytical brains, you know, that existed. And somewhere in there, you've also got a business brain that, you know, you're a principal, so you're responsible for another whole part of what goes on in the company. Take me back to when you discovered you were going to be an architect, or that little journey that got you from not even knowing that it existed to getting to existing.
Well, I was fortunate to have known its existence from my early childhood. My father's an architect, so I remember him working on his thesis and, you know, building this giant table-sized model, and he had a drafting table with a May line. And so, you know, I grew up kind of at the feet of being exposed to that. Now, my father never said, oh, you know, actually, like many architects, we actually discourage folks to go into architecture. And so when I was trying to choose a major to specialize in university and college, it was more of a process of elimination. I knew what I did not want to do. So, you know, going into medicine, law, so forth. And I always enjoyed kind of being creative, and I wasn't a very good artist per se, because I liked the kind of the technical constraints as well.
Yep.
And so I thought, oh, let's just try out this thing called architecture, and just fell in love with it from like first day of freshman year. And so I really kind of, maybe it wasn't quite coincidence and some fate, but fell into it and just haven't looked back.
And did you go home and your dad said, no, not architecture, take another look?
No, he did not. He actually encouraged me. And so, yeah, it's been fun to talk, you know, back and forth with him and about his experience. So,
and does he still practice?
Also,
does he still?
He recently retired, so he's definitely given me the space to kind of
spread your wings.
Right. Make a career from my own kind of mistakes, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. I think there must be an immense sense of sort of internal pride that, say, your father has, that you followed, you know, a discipline that he loved, and worked in, and for all it's, every industry's the same. My dad was a fine artist, and he worked in advertising for many years, and he would say, whatever you do, don't go into advertising. And he was in that era of, the show Mad Men. He was in that era of advertising in the early days of his advertising career. And he would always say, it's the worst thing that you could ever do. Yet he went to work happily every day to do what he was doing. Right. But he saw that he wanted so much more for us as kids. So it was to have somebody, it's like when I was with some people the other day, and all their kids actually work in their family business, and they produce architectural panels for screening and all these kinds of things, but all custom. And with that, I was like, this truly is a family business, so that was like the kids that are still at school still work in the business as well. And I'm like, it's this multi-generational business, because it came from his father as well. And so you go, there's something magical about that. And he said, I'm just, makes me really happy to see them at work and finding their niche within business, and, or discovering, not necessarily finding, discovering, and that thing of having somebody that you could talk to about your pursuit, and ideally add value to your pursuit.
Value and collective commiserating.
Yes, of course.
I mean, coincidentally, my wife, her father is a physician, and she became a physician too. So I don't know, maybe we were just made for each other. But we have 2 kids, and it's strange. She and I are both right-handed. Both our 2 kids are left-handed. So we're kind of like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And it sounds like our oldest daughter, she's 15, she wants to become a writer, and our son, who's 10, is kind of leaning in that direction, maybe writing animation or some combination. So it's kind of like they have, neither of them, time will tell, have any interest in medicine or architecture. So I don't know if we're being great parents or bad parents.
Possibly both. Isn't that fascinating? They're both left-handers. So they're living in a right-handed house and a right-handed home predominantly.
We have to sit strategically at the dinner table, because you want both the left-handers on the left edge, so you're not, bumping forks with right and left-handers.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And isn't that an interesting thing as well? Like, what percentage of the population is left-handed? Have you any idea?
I'm going to make a wild guess, like 10%.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I think it is something like that. So let's just say it's 10%. And you guys are consciously present of that all the time. And you in the place of creating things for other people and environments, like we were talking about the Blue Bottle coffee, environments that you're creating in, and you've got this running in your background the whole time. This is like ever present. What happens for those 10%? What happens for those 10%? I didn't know you had to sit on that side, but of course it makes perfect sense now that you say it. And Americans eat with a fork more than a knife and a fork as well. Whereas if you're in Britain, they would probably eat more with a knife and fork. Americans tend to eat a lot more with a fork. I only know that from traveling. Yeah.
Right. So we do a lot of educational buildings as well. So, classroom settings, and, growing up, we didn't have many options. And the folks who were left-handed, and they had those, I don't know, those swing arms that came out of the chairs, and you saw them kind of like,
at the chiropractor for the rest of their life.
Right. So hopefully we've made better strides in design for, more universal accessibility.
And you think of, like even left-handed scissors. So does your house have like all these double sets of things like that? Do you have left-handed scissors and right-handed scissors?
We don't. We have a lot of pairs of scissors. I don't think any of them are intentionally left-handed. Always lose scissors.
One of those things with scissors is, depending on how good they are, but if you're using them with the wrong hand, the blade doesn't, if there's any slop in the blade at all, it won't cut it. It'll just bend, bend what it's trying to cut. and especially fabrics and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
if you don't get the pressure through the handle right, it doesn't work that way. And of
Well,
course,
now that you mention it, yeah, I should ask or observe my children, see if they actually they're forced to cut with their right hand or not.
yeah, I wonder if they are. Yeah, that's yeah. What a fascinating thing as well. Your wife, medical, you architectural. Kids, we're not doing that. No, no, we're going our own way, but we're both lefties. Yeah,
Right.
Southpaw.
Yeah. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Tell me about, your study and, where you went and what were your big influences there? Who was the one who probably blew the top of your head off and you went, oh, you can never look back from this moment?
Yeah, I remember. So I grew up in a suburb of Dallas, Texas, and didn't travel much growing up, so was kind of just exposed to everything that was Texas, which is quite a lot, and only applied to three schools for college, and ended up going to Berkeley only because my dad suggested I apply there because he said it's a good university.
Yeah.
So I end up there and really just fell in love with the Bay Area. First of all, the climate in the Bay Area it was like 65 degrees
Mm-hmm.
sunny, particularly
Mm-hmm.
in the East Bay and Berkeley every day.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would go back to visit my family in Dallas, and it was just, the oppressive
Heat.
heaviness of the heat and
Yeah.
humidity going back
Mm-hmm.
in the summer was just, I still wonder how I ever lived there. But I had some influential professors. One of them is Renee Chow. She's the dean there now. And she, through her mentorship and just my exploration, a few kind of academics that stand out is John Hobrocken. Back then, it was before the computer generative design. This was more about kind of like the generative design in the sense of the analog version, right? Where you're exploring like what fundamentally are the components of design.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be cultural, it could be structural, it could be, whatever. So that really was a facet that I enjoyed. And then, just kind of looking around you, whether it's, visiting or books or publications. This was in the late 90s. Stumbled across Peter Zumthor, and, Swiss architect. And we
Mm-hmm.
did this trip to Europe between, I think it was my sophomore and junior years, and spent about 2 weeks in the kind of that Switzerland, Austria kind of area.
Yeah.
And
That sort of semi-Germanic area
exactly.
of Europe. Yeah. Yeah. Switzerland on
And
the
and
edge
we
of that, but then definitely Austria, Germany, those kind of places.
Right. And then we would go to a friend of mine, classmate, we would go down to Italy and back. And I had an aunt who was living at that time in Austria. So we used her house as kind of a home base and would use the Euro at the time, right?
Uh-huh.
It's 2 weeks, I forget, maybe $100 or something like
Yeah,
that. And you could
Eurail pass and you could travel anywhere. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And we would strategically take these night trains. So you would take a night train and, wake up in Rome or, Vienna or
And you'd
wherever.
save a night's accommodation as well.
Right. Probably we probably did that too many consecutive nights, too many consecutive nights to be within a confined interior space. But so being
Uh,
able to take a train and go into Switzerland, where Zumthor had done a lot of his early work, was
mhm,
really inspiring. I really appreciated Piano's work, Tom Main's work at
mhm,
Morphosis.
mhm.
And so I had a collection of books that I still kind of flip through. Particularly, these were when, particularly in studio, we didn't use computer as much as I think is used today. And so everything was still hand drawn, like
Mhm,
hand drafted, hand drawn
mhm.
plans, sections, perspectives. And the books would reflect that. And
Yeah.
now you look at these publications and, it's mostly filled with diagrams, computer generated diagrams and technical documents. So, I think that's important. I'm certainly not a proponent of adopting technology, but do appreciate the time that I went through school and think that it was helpful and beneficial.
Sure. I've got a question around this, the hand-drawn piece, because you would have been in a major piece of the transition from hand-drawn to computerization. And in that, as people learnt the digital tool, being the computer, it obviously had to grow up as well along the way. And so there'd be those really early native learners that just adopted it, and that's where they've stayed. And then there'd be the people that didn't necessarily adopt it particularly well or whatever. And, they were always constrained. And I see this today with some people. They're constrained by their knowledge of how to drive the machine. It's the difference between, I suppose, you getting in a car and driving around, and then, Lewis Hamilton or somebody like that jumping in a Formula One and being able to drive that around. And, they've got mastery in this area. And then, a rally car that might be gravel roads and stuff like that, they've got this mastery and they're at one with that piece of machinery. And I see some people who, will get behind it with, they're doing Revit or ArchiCAD or whatever it is. And they have just, their thinking is as fluid as the machine. They can go anywhere at any time, and they've worked out the construction method of things for using the machine. And in that transition, my question is did you think that architecture lost, or creativity lost, a lot of stuff as it became more prevalent that you had to go down the digital world versus the physical world? Is there something that shows up in society because of it? I think of things that I think do now, but I'll get your answer first.
That's a great question. I think one thing I've noticed, and you're right, I was kind of like at the early parts of the digital adoption, and certainly had to use it early in my career, and still try to maintain some, maybe it's not daily, but involvement in those tools. Otherwise, 10, 20 years from now, I won't be able to use any of the, technology then. So I certainly think it's beneficial to be competent in these tools, both digital and the analog. And I've noticed that folks who are more or less only using digital tools, for example, I will ask some folks who've drawn up a plan and it's all been in the computer, well, what's the dimension of that hallway? And most often the answer is, oh, I got to look it up. I got to check. But when you actually draw the width of the hallway and you had to use a scale to measure, let's say it's 8 feet or whatever it is, you remember these things. And so there's a sense of spatial scale that's kind of amorphous when you're in the digital world. You're always spinning things around, looking at it upside down, left, right, forward, which I think it's great.
Yep.
But it's also, and we have this tool, it's a plugin called Enscape into Revit, where in real time, when you're in the kind of construction model, there is a screen next to it that's rendering that space.
Okay.
And so if you, move a wall or change a door, that screen with the rendering will update instantaneously.
As you go.
And so as you go, so we, colleagues of mine are constantly looking back and forth. So not just looking at plan only of what happens when you move this wall, but how does that affect the kind of 3D perspective of that? And it's rendering the actual materials in real time. So we also use VR in the past several years too. So being able to walk through, not just as architects, but our clients, they can walk through, navigate through a space and not have to, provide their input and feedback from a floor plan.
A markup on a floor plan.
Right. Yeah. It's really kind of dissolved this kind of divide between kind of designer and user. For the better.
Yeah, I was about to say with that, that's that thing, like you go to the doctor and they don't give you any insight into what it is. They just tell you what they're going to do. The better ones have better bedside manners than the ones who don't, but it's the mystery of the thing. And I think that architecture possibly has suffered by the mystery of the thing. You know, people take a great leap of faith with great amounts of money into this. We're going to, let's say it's a family home, we're going to trust this guy to draw this thing, and we're going to try and imagine it. And there's no way that they can imagine it like you can. And it's like this expectation as it comes together. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's, I think, certain limitations of that as well, because some clients will want to know like exactly what it's going to look like and feel like, and there isn't, as you say, that you know, there is some mystery behind this design process and some trust that's required. And you know, hopefully you're a good enough architect to kind of, you know, we're always looking into the future, right, as we design. And so, you know, connecting the present to the future is definitely, it's an art, right? And so if everything needs to be translated into a photoreal rendering or animation, that becomes a challenge too. You know, it becomes a lot more laborious in that kind of design time that it takes.
Yeah, well, exactly. You know, you think about the number of hours. The thing that, I think it was Rick Joy who said to me, you know, like about computers, he was like, these guys, nobody works in scale anymore. And he forces them in his, well, not forces, but in his studio, there's a whole thing around you work by hand with a ruler at times so that you work in scale and that you get an appreciation of scale. And I know you will have probably done this as well, but the number of times we run around with the tape measure in your own home and go, yeah, I know I can't make that fit that way so easily. You know, that would be a pinch point. And you can see it on the paper, but then you go, you know, you measure it and you go, oh, yeah, maybe, you know, like I often see interior designers who put, you know, we'll use meters, but that would be like 3 feet between a corner of a chair and a sofa. Well, that's almost too far to have a conversation. You know, this gap could be as little as 300 or 400, depending on the size of the people, and you'll create intimacy, but they just kind of plonk it out because they've lost all sense of scale and they're not operating in that mode. And that hallway thing that you said, I see that happen a lot as well, where people, it kind of all fits and yeah, like away they go. But I've also seen in the pencil side of it, you know, somebody has printed something off and they've shrunk it to fit the paper, not knowingly in the printer. And next thing they've drawn for a day, you know, tracing over or what this other piece. So they've got, you know, white paper, yellow paper, yellow trace or white trace over it. And they, all of a sudden they realize that they, because they're not so used to working in scale, that their hallways are too narrow and something, they go and put a measurement down and they go, whoa, hold on a second, why isn't that fitting? And then they trace it back and they go, oh, I started with something that was real. I used a copier, or I used a printer, and it's actually rescaled it on me. And now it's all just a little bit.
Right. I learned early on, always in particularly in, you know, floor plans, site plans, what have you, add where is north and what is the scale.
Yeah, always. It's a good point, eh? Like, yeah. And whereas north is equally as good point, because orientation's everything, you know. Interesting. I find this, there's things that are being lost and there's things that are being gained, obviously. And when I was saying before, like a good friend, Michael Malone, I was saying just recently to somebody, does Michael ever go to work? Like, that guy is always traveling and he's always sketching. And so he's always drawing a picture of some kind. And that takes time, but he's a great artist and an architectural artist. And then on the other side of it, that gets lost so quickly these days because we have so many tools. So what do you think AI will do to, say, for instance, the floor plan? I want to preface that with just one other little thing. Often, because you're still, when somebody's building a floor plan, or not necessarily a floor plan, but a product, a building in Revit, you know, the BIM model is asking for so many levels of things that they're working in a way more complex detail than they might be if they're thinking just conceptually and schematic. And with that, when they go back and say somebody else has to pick that file up, there's all this other complex thinking that the machine is simplified, but they've still put it together their way. The left-handed, right-handed thing, they've still done it in their own method, right. And somebody else picks the file up and they've got to go, hold on, how did this get put together to get this so I can change this?
Well, I mean, you said it, it's a tool, right? Anything that we use, whether it's a pencil or a mouse or, VR goggles, whatever it might be, understanding what that tool is helping you design and not asking it or trying to get it to do something it's not good at. So, for example, I've learned, and as you design and you build, that seeing through your projects in construction, you understand how to design better and what to document and how to detail. So you mentioned left hand and right hands, but as designers, we also have to think about the tradespeople and how they interpret our documents and our details. And back in the day, architects were master builders, and we've kind of lost touch with that kind of design and building. But yeah, I think our practice really commits ourselves to that kind of construction phase. So we can learn for that next project to understand, well, we detailed it, this way, but it would be much more intuitive for the contractor to document it another way.
Yes.
To facilitate a more well-executed, result.
I think that's fascinating, that part. Like, as you say, even different institutions, for study, some are very physical based, so I was talking to a guy the other day, Trevor Dunn, and it'll come to me, but Dunwoody College, and he was saying, everything is like hand built, and they build things, they do things all the time. And in the study of where they're going with it, the fascination is being able to, you've got to be able to not limit yourself by the fact that it's Trevor Bullen, and you're not limiting yourself by the fact that it's what you can physically do. You've got to be able to think beyond that to the future, and then also having it based in how it's going to be done, the method that the builder is going to use to do it. It's not like back in the day when you said they were, master builders, and they came from that kind of end. And I know in Germany, there's still quite a bit of that, where you actually have to be able to build it to actually, not totally, but a master builder in Germany is the equivalent of an architect everywhere else, but they come from the physical side of it. And there's that piece of that limits you, and there's another piece of that frees you.
Right. No, exactly. And I think we were just talking about this on a project discussion before, my talk with you, is that sometimes having some naivete about what is impossible or what is possible is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think certainly having constraints opens up more creativity, but sometimes we get almost frozen by the constraints by limiting ourselves with those constraints. Rather,
and then we don't innovate.
Right. And so you don't imagine what's possible because those constraints are so in front of you.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is good to ignore those constraints to, as you say, you can imagine more innovation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And who's to say something that's less efficient is bad? Sometimes, walking through a building that is not the most, let's say, straightforward, the experience of that can open up more possibilities as well. So, it's an art. That's why,
yeah, exactly.
And architecture. Yeah.
I think that analogy you just said there with walking through a building, how as designers, we do things where we want to slow people, or we want to make a moment, or those kinds of things. We want to shift their gaze. You've got something you don't want them to see, so you do the magic trick of making where they put their feet is where they're going to watch, and then you open it up again for them because it becomes and you might shift the light around on them and things like that, because you're going to have to create things, and you want to create moments and moods and everything as well. And sometimes the discomfort creates the best mood. Frank Lloyd Wright's compress release, the discomfort of being compressed, and then the release of being that whole opening up. And then if you pour light in, and he used to do the same, darken all the compression and lighten all the next piece. And it's a formula that is now used everywhere, but it's a formula, and it's one that gives you contrast. And without contrast, we don't necessarily get an experience.
Agree. Yeah, having that variety of the human experience makes our, I think, lives more fulfilling.
Oh. I'd like to thank Stetson Hats Australia for providing my amazing collection of open road Stetson hats. Since 1865, John B. Stetson has been crafting legendary headwear, adorning the heads of Western icons like Annie Oakley and George Custer. The open road hat debuted in 1937, beloved by artists, outlaws, presidents alike. Its timeless style fits the setting from city streets to open plains. Whether in the cab of a truck or my trusty Mini Cooper, the open road is all style. If you think hats aren't for you, you just haven't found the right one yet. Discover yours at stetsonaustralia.com or stetson.com if you're in the USA. Thanks, Stetson, for your support. Please share your Stetson moment by emailing me your photo to talkdesign@gmail.com. Let's celebrate the timeless allure of Stetson together. Where I live, so I live in southeast Queensland, in a place called the Sunshine Coast, and we have what we call a hinterland, which is a big set of hills behind us, and then we have beaches, and we're subtropical, we're not like fully tropical, and our leaves don't turn. Our seasons blend together. Is it easy to live in? Oh, yeah, it's really easy to live in. 330 sunshine days a year. It's beautiful. Most of the time we get enough rainfall, so it's lush. We get humidity as well. But the contrast of, say, being like in Philly, where you go from heat to cold, you'll have snow on the ground in the winter, and you get all 4 seasons. My kids experience 4 seasons by traveling. They do not experience it by living. And I came from, I'm a Kiwi, came from New Zealand, where you experience all 4 seasons. And so I say to people sometimes, oh, it's a bland landscape, and that it isn't, but it's bland in the fact that it doesn't demand much of me. I can wear a t-shirt and shorts most days. It doesn't demand me to dress up a lot. It doesn't demand any of those things. And so you get very, like if you're designing for a state where it does get cold and all those things, without the experience of it, you don't have that empathy or understanding of that. I always think in New York or somewhere like that, Philly would be the same. The coat racks. Well, here there's no coat rack. There's lucky if there's an umbrella space. But, that is a part of the culture, because you need to be warm to do the next thing, or you come in, you want to take that off, and then away you go, coat check at a department store and stuff. My kids would never experience that unless we travel.
Right, exactly. So, I do miss the 60, 70 degree everyday weather of Berkeley. I remember my now wife was going to med school in Chicago when I was in Berkeley, so I'd go visit her, and I still remember it so vividly. Around April, that first day in Chicago when it's kind of above freezing.
Yep.
And everyone is out in like shirts, t-shirts and shorts.
Bikinis.
Well, maybe not that far, but they appreciate the good weather when you experience the bad weather, right? Yeah. So to your point, you do appreciate the variety more when you have it.
Yeah, and I think that's that thing with, in that design sense that happens. Let's talk about some projects as well. So because we're talking about variety, I'm going to go to Blue Bottle Coffee, and I want you to tell me the journey of Blue Bottle Coffee for you guys, and about that variety, about why is it done that way? Why aren't they just all the same? Go for it.
Yeah, so they reached out initially to our San Francisco studio, and we did a handful of cafes in the Bay Area, and then they wanted to expand to the East Coast. So starting in Washington, D.C., we did our first East Coast design store. And there is, or was and is, a cult following with Blue Bottle.
Mm-hmm.
And as we started designing these cafes, understanding kind of something as maybe off the radar as a queue anxiety is something that they were very concerned about, because as these cafes opened up, the lines would be just, around the block. And kind of understanding the sequence and the choreography as a customer comes into the cafe, through the front door, and being able to kind of experience this kind of, I would say it was a designed narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
The story of actually going into the store, ordering your cup of coffee, waiting for that pour over, which can take 5 minutes,
It's a long time.
It is a long time. So what do you do there
Social media
during that time?
Your phone.
Well, so we wanted to elevate the making of the coffee as something that you are participating in, requires an audience, or attracts an audience rather. So you're not staring at your phone or doing something else. So we believed that when folks at Blue Bottle said, hey, the waiting is part of the journey, that we wanted to design these cafes to really elevate that waiting experience, whether it's the materials on the counter, the backdrop, right, of the baristas and how they're in this kind of space.
And the machinery, all those things, all the stuff that's going on in the space, engage all your senses.
Yeah, one of my favorite cafes that we designed is right across the street from Grand Central Station in New York City. It used to be an old cigar shop. I gotta say it was probably about, I don't know, less than 20 by 20 feet.
Yeah,
and
so that's pretty small.
It is. So we've done kind of freestanding kiosks to be of that similar scale to, I think this Grand Central South was one of their smaller cafes, to one of the biggest cafes in Chicago. So there's quite, and that's within a couple hundred square feet of difference from small to large.
Yep.
And being able to kind of really sweat the details of the materials. When it is that small, you have to be very intentional about the tectonics of how a counter meets the floor, or how in this case at Grand Central South, that we had these kind of wood beams. So, to your point of this kind of compression and release, is that in this small ceiling space, how do you create these beams without feeling like, you're in this tight kind of coffin?
That they closed it down on people. Yeah.
Right. So it's really quite an interesting problem to solve at this kind of small scale. And, there's probably a dozen or so more people in this small little space. And so giving each person kind of their own area to wait without feeling like, they're too close to their
it's the thing, isn't it? It's like it's like the Tokyo train station, the New York subway, and then being able to walk through the lot and get in your car. Like on one side of the country you've got this, and then how do people feel comfortable to be in that space and spend that time with other people around them? There must be another metric which came to me when you were saying, and because you're a principal, you'll be able to answer this one, I'm sure. I'm not sure. And it occurred to me, like there's a square footage rental space, or they're renting the building. And at some point there's a metric that says you've got to pour X number of coffees a day and sell X number of cookies, or whatever the thing is, to make that pay. And then there's got to go beyond that to make it into profit. And so you let the brand maybe bring them in, but when your rental cost in New York by Grand Central Station will not be cheap. You could probably rent a store in California, maybe not California, they've got horrible taxes, but in Texas, you could probably rent a store in Texas of 4 times the size for the same amount of floor space, but the metric would be the same on the number of coffees that have to be poured to cover the rent and the electricity and those things. Do they get into that when you're doing the design? Is that part of the brief?
Yeah, we would often visit kind of prospective locations with Blue Bottle. And they wanted our input about an interior former whatever it was store, and ask us to consider an early or initial test fit. So knowing how the equipment that they require to make their product, we would just make a initial first pass about the layout, this queue, so on and so forth, and then they would run their metrics behind it to see if the numbers added up. And so sometimes the test fit and the numbers didn't work. But also when we were touring these potential spaces with James, the founder of Blue Bottle, there was this kind of it wasn't mathematical, right? Something about like this neighborhood feels like it
feels like the right place for us.
We belong here.
And
so it was this fascinating kind of intuitive and very logical combination of trying to find that right balance.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because there's still the gut feel. There's still the we can make this work here. There's still that thing of knowing your numbers well enough and knowing that you can fit your equipment, and then going, yeah, we'll do it, and being up for the journey again, of learning from the journey along the way. That's fantastic.
Well, we see our own design process kind of this balance of the intuitive and intellectual, or intuitive and rigorous. So you need both. If you're only rigorous, then you don't really celebrate this kind of finding human spirit that we have, right?
But so you end up with a square box pretty quickly if you're only rigorous.
Exactly.
Oh, sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say, with Blue Bottle, every store is different and tells the same overarching story, is that correct, of the coffee, but it tells a story of its own environment in its city. Have I got that right?
That's spot on. So they are now in South Korea, and they have a big presence in Japan. And so this kind of international, obviously the culture in those two countries are different and unique too, but still trying to have that similar Blue Bottle culture. So it's definitely, and I think a lot of that, because these cafes are all unique, but there's a kind of similar spirit to all if you start to like look at all the cafes, and I would assume and bet that if you didn't have that actual, the Blue Bottle logo, that you would see a similar DNA throughout all the cafes. And it's not like they only use, Bolin, Swinsky, Jackson. They use a lot of other architects too. So it's actually quite fascinating experiment to see kind of the continuity in these cafes by various other architects.
Oh, right. I didn't realize that. I thought you guys were probably doing them all. That's really fascinating. So that, they're getting different handwriting out of it as well, and different kind of push towards what maybe matters culturally in different places. Slightly, because I'm thinking, when you said before, we were talking about how much space do you have to stand in. Well, culturally, each of those cultures demands a different metric for that, from how they've been, their own culture is formed. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Exactly.
Really well, you guys are, the Apple Store people as well. So the same sort of thing must have been in the DNA of creating Apple stores.
Yeah, that's it's a very long story that we probably will run out of time in, but
we'll do an Apple Store podcast. Yeah,
right. So we worked with Apple for over 2 decades, and what was interesting is that there are these new stores that are new from the ground up, and then there are the locations that actually adapt old historic buildings. And I found that some of my favorite stores that we've designed are the more historic stores, the locations at like Covent Garden, or there's an old bank that we converted on the Upper East Side in New York City. And so don't get me wrong, the Fifth Avenue store
flagship
with the with the cube is probably iconic in and of itself. But understanding that kind of, it's almost this duality, right? Where technology is so new, transformative, forward looking, but now you're doing this in a building that's over 100 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and you know, as I mentioned, our office, we just moved into it used to be a private dining club when this building was finished in 1929.
Yep.
And has a lot of the ornate kind of Corinthian columns and such. And, you know,
It's
I
highly
don't know if,
decorative, you know, like it's,
well, and I don't know if
yeah.
I've ever drawn that type of detail in any of our projects, but we did as we started to figure out what we're going to insert into this space and not have it feel like it doesn't fit.
That's a really interesting thing, that, isn't it? Because like probably nobody that you employ has ever drawn Corinthian columns unless they were, you know, teasing somebody. But that's probably never been in their style or in something that, even to the point of like the financial viability of adding that much decorative element to a place. You go, wow, we're going down a rabbit hole in a commercial space here. You know, nowadays we'd project it on a wall, I guess. We just use you would just use light to do it. But then taking that and everybody getting to appreciate it and everybody getting to actually work with it along that journey as well is a real, again, that mind for it builds a new space.
And celebrating kind of the history of this space that we're in, because some of as we built out a mezzanine floor, we started getting really close to those kind of the caps of these Corinthian columns, and noticed that, you know, there were chips here and there. And, you know, do we hire a kind of artisan plasterer to come in and restore it, or do we just kind of leave it as is and celebrate that, hey, this has lived a life? And it's going to continue to live a life, and we will just experience it along that continuum.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. That's, you know, and making the decisions where it matters for that as well is really interesting to see where you land. Because in some spaces there'll be, I imagine, the tendency to want to repair or want to tidy it up, and then in other spaces it's like, man, it doesn't matter. It's not what it's about.
Sometimes it's just more authentic to celebrate the scars.
Yeah, exactly. I know, you know, I was saying to you before, earlier this year I went and saw Ray Clabro up in Seattle's office, and it's, you know, amazing office looking over the markets over Pike Street there, and just really, really cool. And then again, it's a repurposed old building, and it's got its own texture and history to it as well. I like that. It always brings me back to the company Patagonia, you know, where they go, we're a destination. We don't need to be in the main street, where people will come to us and what can we find and restore and keep in a neighborhood something that belonged there, or not necessarily belonged, but has been there for a long time. And how do we use that? Because people will come to us. And that Apple could do the same. You know, they could put it in like that art installation in Marfa, Texas, of Prada. You know, that could be a Prada store. People would go and shop there. You know, it could be it could be the real deal because it's destination driven.
Exactly.
I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you, which one is your favorite space in your own home, and why is it your favorite space, and what emotion does it evoke?
I'm actually thinking about this not that long ago. I've always grown up in homes here in the US for various reasons where there wasn't a mudroom. So whether it's, you know, I was living in downtown, you know, an apartment building, or wherever it might be. But whenever I would visit family in Seoul and Korea, there's always this kind of choreography of, even in high-rise apartments, where you would enter in through the front door and there's an area that everyone would take their shoes off. Right. And it was this kind of defined experience in every home. And so growing up here in the US and not having that, always felt like there was this disconnect in how I just kind of live my daily life. And so when we recently moved, we weren't seeking this out, but our house has a mudroom. And so that's that's my favorite space, because I feel like I can actually use and live in this house the way I grew up.
Yeah.
Right. And it feels familiar to me. I mean, there's the convenience and the practicality of it, but that just ritual of coming in a specifically designed space to, take your shoes off. It seems very basic, but
I totally get it. And it probably harks very much to your analytical brain side of you going, it's a tradition, and it's not only that, it's got high practicality. What's outside stays outside, comes inside is stays inside as such.
Yeah. Well, we do we do a lot of houses for individuals too. And so the first request that we ask of them is to what we call just write their own program. So, and it can be very technical, you need 3 beds, 3 baths, so on and so forth. But then also to write, their emotional connection to this house. When do they want to see the stars at night when they're sleeping, or something of that nature that isn't necessarily you're not going to look in your design handbook and know how to design that space. It's these kind of the process, the journey of making these spaces or places that are unique and tailored to each individual. I think makes us really enjoy kind of that design variety.
I love that. I really love that, because, like that mudroom piece for you holds on to your past and your family history going backwards, and you're actually now infusing it into your own family history. And there's a sense that comes with that of continuity and why it matters. And especially when it's a cultural one like that. And then, when you're working with a client, it's their house. It's, it's going to be their home. And finding those, that's why I asked the question, is for that reason alone, is just what is this emotional floor plan that they're going to be in, and how will the architecture respond to these things? And that little touchstone, like you said, the mudroom and all the rest is highly practical. People use it in tons of spaces, but for you, it has another level of meaning. And you get to hold on and enjoy and infuse that. I think it's
we had a husband and wife who wanted us to design a house on the Venetian Islands in Miami Beach. And they, as expected, or as one could expect, they wanted a house that was very kind of indoor outdoor living. And I still remember Christine, she said, one of my favorite things to do is to make a cup of coffee in the morning as I get out of bed. So that's something that was very prescriptive, that had meaning to her. And so we put in a little area that she could make her coffee right behind the bed. And it was interesting, visiting John and Christine over the years. They would find something unique every time I visited, like, oh, I didn't know you actually designed, this experience for me. And one of them was that it was floor to floor window walls or glazing in many areas, particularly in the kind of the living space. And we floated a kind of a wood ceiling below the top of that glazing. And for us, it's to get a very clean detail so that you're able to get the glass wall above the ceiling height.
And so when you look through,
right, so from the exterior you see more of a transparent building, and maybe we never explained it intentionally like this, but when he said he was in his living space, it felt like the walls were going up forever, because you couldn't see where the glazing stopped and started at the ceiling. So it felt like he was floating on the ground in his living room. So, it's things like that. You can't really, well, maybe we should, but maybe we don't do it all the time as much as we should. But it's these little moments that we see as we design these spaces. And, you hope the client, the inhabitant experiences that, and maybe it's not on day one, but as they start to kind of find their own idiosyncratic ways of living,
Yeah.
it kind of reveals themselves.
I think that the journey is in the reveal myself, because and when they're conscious of it and they discover it, and it's something that you've done that will create magic, whether they ever notice it or don't notice it, it creates another feeling. And it's a game of how many emotions can we engage and get them to, nurture them with their emotions, like
Right.
I think that's actually one of the biggest joys of design, whether you design a coffee cup, a door handle, a light switch, those little things that make it simple, but also maybe add a little bit of extra, that is a little bit of fascination. That I used to design clothing, and one of the things that we used to do was we would sometimes use labels internally in garments so that you would discover them. And we might use an embroidery like under a pocket flap. You may never open the pocket. It might be one up here on your chest. You may never open it. But the day you do, you might have had that garment for 5 years or something, and you go, no way, I didn't know that was ever there. And then you're forever anchored to, we used to use it as a psychological anchor to a brand, but we wouldn't show people it. We would hide it, or, do under the back of a collar. We might have embroidered something under the back of a collar, and it'd be a shirt collar. Unless you were the person ironing it, you probably never know it was there, or pulling it in and out of the wash. And if it's not your shirt, it doesn't mean much to you unless it engages you in another way. And I remember when I first ever kind of discovered this, it was a Quicksilver bucket hat, and inside it had a label that said head trip. That's what it's like. It just said head trip inside the hat. And I'm like, huh, isn't that just, it took you somewhere, just you were like, oh, there you go, like but I never forgotten it.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah, really, exactly. That's it. Were they all just stoned sitting at the beach, tripping out, or what does it mean? Like, what does it mean?
On what level are they asking this? Yeah.
But this hat takes a trip on your head as well. Like, it goes somewhere, like there's all these things. And it's like, but it engaged me to the point where I remembered it. And I'm like, do you know what? Why aren't we engaging our customer that way? Why don't we engage them on this next level? And why don't we give them discovery for themselves? We'll give them the obvious, but then why don't we give them the discovery for themselves, the little pieces that they suddenly go, did you choose to do that? Or was that a happy accident? Of course, we always chose. Sometimes they're happy accidents. But
right. Well, I mean, speaking of happy accidents, I think, no matter how intentional we are at times in designing a building or an experience, people are just going to find their own way. And sometimes you go back and you've seen these like paths that weren't designed, but they're worn because that's where, folks wanted to get from point A to point B. Yeah. And, you realize that you can be prescriptive as much as you intend, but people will find their own way.
They 100%, 100%. And you could never probably understand somebody's habits enough to know what their prescription will be. You can get close, but maybe never get all the way there. And especially when it's a new built space, you can prescribe so much of it. And then, you go back around there and you go, I never thought the furniture would be like this.
Right.
We didn't draw the furniture in those spots.
Right. We're doing a new student housing project at Syracuse, and we're in the very early days, and it's taking over kind of this unused area where some students are currently using to get from, one part of the campus to another. And so, it came up in our discussions of, if now a building is there, will students try to still get from that same point A to point B, even though a building is there? And someone from the university said, well, just wait 3 years and no one will remember. because those students will no longer be there. And I thought that was actually a fascinating
Isn't
insight
it?
that,
Yeah.
right, the folks who experience this building will always change every 3 to 4 years.
Other than the professors and maybe the staff of the team that runs
Right.
the place, they'll be the ones who actually get the long experience.
Right, right.
Isn't that?
Exactly. So, you know, designing these homes that people will use for decades to kind of student housing that folks will only use for, you know, a few years.
It's a very different shift, isn't it?
It
Very
is. It
different
is.
shift.
And that's what really excites me is that, you know, being able to look at both ends of that kind of perspective and that variety.
Yeah, and take the knowledge from one and put it into the other. And then also, like with the retail space, being able to take that knowledge of retail space and put it into a living space, you know, being conscious of things you wouldn't normally be conscious of. I love that. I think that's it. Well, that's the richness of design. That's what good
Yeah,
design's about.
and sometimes they actually happily overlap. So we're finishing up. It's a mass timber math and science and innovation building in Dallas. Actually, Michael Malone was part of that in the early days of the architect selection, and the head of school is a fan of Blue Bottle and said, "Can we get a Blue Bottle cafe in our math and science building?" And so, you know, being able to kind of use the same details and the queue anxiety of Blue Bottle is now part of that kind of learning curve that we're ahead of in this cafe for middle and, you know, high school students.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You know, when you said about the queue anxiety, I remember, so I used to train innovation at Airbus and in Europe, and you would always be looking for great examples of how things innovated or things were innovated. And I remember clearly the story around downtown New York and all the old buildings with their rattly lifts. And then the high-speed lifts came in, and that whole sector of town basically dried up for commercial space because everybody was waiting so long for their lifts. And they looked at the millions of dollars back in the day it would have cost to repurpose or refit every building with high-speed lifts, and even though they were much lower, but and somebody came up with the answer of mirrors so that people didn't mind the wait because they could observe others while they were waiting. And that's where mirrored lift lobbies and even mirrors in lifts comes from, was that innovation that solved that real estate problem that existed.
Yeah.
And when you were saying before about the queue anxiety, one of the things that went through my mind was, you know, do they get to observe other people? Because whilst there's the theatre of coffee making, it's also a social experience of hearing other people, of feeling the energy of other people in the space. You know, it's like a restaurant. We want to see their food and we want to see our food. We don't want to hear their conversation, but we want to know that we're not in there alone. We want the human connection.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. I always find those things fascinating to unwrap, you know, like what happens in that journey. I've got a last question. I asked this one of a lot of people. It is one last project, and you've got to hang up your pencil and your computer, and you can't influence another project. This is it. You're done. You're done. This is the last one that you ever get to do. And what will you choose?
Never actually thought of that question before. I don't know if this is not answering your question, but it's, if whatever is my current last project were the last, I think, I hope that all the process, the journey, the collaboration with, you know, my colleagues, the clients, stakeholders, users, that to me is what makes things special. So whether it's a house, a cafe, you know, museum, whatever it might be, that's not what's important to me. It's the people that you encounter and you develop friendships and relationships that's most important. So it could be whatever. It doesn't matter to me. It's just finding those right people.
I love that. I so love that. I had a very early podcast with an architect called Jeffrey Dungan. I was talking to him and I said, you must get some, great projects. And he said to me, it's not about great projects. It's about great people. With great people come great projects. And that flipped the lid off my head because, I'd spent a life looking for great projects. And yeah, from that day on, I just only look for people that we're going to enjoy a journey with, and that we're going to be able to bring magic to them and they're going to be able to bring magic to us. And it's like symbiotic. It works together.
Yeah, 100%.
Your answer is such a poignant answer to me. And every project is just as important as the last when it's that kind of journey. It's a beautiful legacy.
Yeah.
Daniel, awesome. Totally loved our conversation. We could have talked about a lot more things, I know. We will post all your socials, all those things, how to get hold of you and all the rest. And we really encourage listeners to ask questions. So we may be reaching out saying, hey, they want to know about this or they want to know about that.
Yeah, anytime. It's thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. So thank you for making the time.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you for tuning into our conversation. I hope it left you both informed and inspired. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. And please don't hesitate to share your design thoughts with me. It's always a joy to hear from you. If you're like me and crave a deeper dive into design thinking, coupled with a love for travel and adventure, consider one of my architectural adventures. Join me and some of my wonderful design friends and embark on a journey of a lifetime. Apply for an unforgettable design experience at adrianramsey.com. With our clients spanning the globe, I firmly believe behind every great project are great people. If you're a great person and seeking to turn your dream into a reality, I'd be honored to design your home with you. Why not join the ranks of our exceptional clients and let's make your heart sing? Reach out to me at studio@ardesignhouse.com. That's studio@ardesignhouse.com, and let's get a conversation going and make your heart sing.